Good evening and most welcome to Heidegger 683. And finally my colleague Kalle Lundahl is with me once more and we have a live recording. I do have to apologize first, and I am very tired. It was a tough day and I haven't slept for maybe a fortnight. So I will take it easy. I will ease in. I would try to do a second take on this mirror function. And I will start in a really odd way by describing my previous work. What have I put into this? And what happened with this? And I call the lecture preliminary work. It's a biographical review of what I've done before, so to put the whole thing into perspective and might give a hint what it's all about. Around 1997 I fell for Derrida. He was not my first philosopher of choice. I first was with Popper for a couple of years before. But it didn't really grasp me. Popper is really abstract, not practical, and deals mainly with philosophy of science. But Derrida really took a grasp on me, and I decided to read him day and night almost, and that continued for at least the day and night continued for almost 2 years, and then I continued for another year, daytime at least. It was very intense, and I read and I read and I reread and I talked and I rewrote, translated by myself to my paternal tongue, Swedish, or maternal tongue, mother tongue. And then it sort of slided off. It didn't disappear completely. It was always in the background. Around 2000, a little bit earlier, I really dwelled into quantum mechanics. And at this instant, both deconstruction, Derrida, and quantum mechanics was involving in each other, and I found Arkady Plotnitsky, who actually combined them. And that made it even stronger. Derrida, for me at that instance, was the only thinker of the secular world outside quantum mechanics that actually fit together with a world of the new physics, new worldview. And that was incredibly interesting, incredibly interesting. Arkady Plotnitsky I still devour at some instances every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. So he's still there. Then I had friends that were former neighbors, and they had an interest in this Tibetan/Indian philosopher, or rather, well, he's more similar to a creative engineer or something of some sort. His name is Tartan Tulku. And somehow I felt a common thread there, and that interested me. And I saw this was also something that possibly, there I didn't know for sure, but possibly had the same melody at quantum mechanics, the real world. And for me it was really important to the thing being of the world, being provable, being something was not some jest of a philosopher, his fantasy or something else needed to be provable, scientific, and of the real world. And that was important, and I think that attracted me to Tartan Tulku. He's an excellent writer as well. Although the texts are completely mysterious, they're very, very hard to understand. There are very few pointers to real life. There are very few circumstances that you can actually sort of associate with. You are in thin air. There are no real live examples. We continue, we even have a study group here, continuing for 2-3 years, something like that. Me and a fellow called Håkan and a guy called Stig, we met up and studied. And in between we studied even harder. So that was like softening up from the outside in. We didn't really understood what we were learning or what we were studying, or worst case scenario at least memorized. But it was still going on there, and it was a constant delving into it in a very meticulous and disciplined way. And this is important for the understanding, to see how much was put in and how much was repeated. And I don't think I realized at this instance this is going to come to fruition. I didn't know that, but I still continued. Couple of years later, Wittgenstein caught my attention badly, or in a good way. I really love Wittgenstein. He sided well with my further education in linguistics. He sided well also with Popper, even though there were sort of imagined enemies, they were not so alien to each other. Then came Feyerabend. He became a direct interest. And the book that is not the most liked ones, The Conquest of Abundance, really captured me. Because at that time I was also painting. I started painting around 2001, I think. Or was it 2002? I don't remember. Somewhere in that vicinity. And it grew stronger and stronger around 2006. I think I painted somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 hours a week. Yeah, it's Hans Johansson you're talking about. That turned out to be important as well. I had no idea. But it was a massive work put into that. I started early in the morning to paint, and I painted until afternoon somewhere there. And after that I studied. Other people who joined my reading schedule was Maturana, Verala, Georges Bataille. I came an interest through Plotnitsky. There was loads of science writer. Penrose, Pete, also Bohm, and there was the holographic paradigm I got into. I also got into Nagarjuna. I had a friend who was incredibly interested in Nagarjuna and something called the middle way. All these things had a common thread, and that was quantum mechanics, maybe with the exception of Popper, but he's left outside of the picture here. So this was, think of a big stew, and these things were stewing together but still remained individual, and I was constantly probing my mind. Edward de Bono, which I'm going to use today partly, came into the picture long before and lingered on long after as well. I started to read him already 94, 95. And there my interest was actually began with only creative thinking. I wanted to know how to improve the method of thinking, how my skill could become something better. And this is what Edward de Bono is doing. This is I am right, you are wrong. And this is his philosophical magnum opus, you can say magnum opus. It's actually quite a hard read, even though the language is very ordinary, nothing, no hard words. But what he makes a point here, and always struck me as very important, is when he talks about what he calls perception. And he makes a division between what he calls categories and perception. They have a special meaning here in the bonus language. Categories are how we divide the world or how we choose to see the world. This is the divisions that becomes knowledge, one could say, or what we regularly see as knowledge. It could be the division between plants, different plants, animals, but also different things of around us in the world, different acts too, ideologically, religiously, philosophically, sociologically, and so forth. All those are categories. But what he wanted to do is to show that there was actually something beyond categories, and that is quite interesting. And this is maybe the biggest surprise in the book. And you can read the book and still not see that this is actually sticking out from any other writer. And what he means by perception is very close to pure experience. And it's beyond the categories that we usually say are the most important. Categories are, could be if you call somebody criminal. So that's a category. But perception is even more to the core. Somebody seemed to be criminal, somebody is perceived to be criminal. It's not that simple. It has to do with the senses, but it is something stronger. And what he means is that if we want to change people, we need to change their perception, because if we just change the categories, nothing really would happen. And he found this point that there is something stronger than we usually think is the strongest, and that's pure experience. Could be a superficial change when we change categories. And I come to the conclusion that my beloved work earlier in 1984, where the government controls the people by renaming things, calling liberty for unfreedom and oppression for freedom. They called capitulation for victory and so forth. I don't think that idea would work. That thing wouldn't work, because that is no change of perception. It's just change of words, categories. And I realized that all of a sudden. And what this has done is been working on the outside of my understanding. So one could say that conceptually, abstractly, scientifically, and also provable, that what these things did, so to speak. They gave me proof for different things. It showed conceptually how something could work. In an abstract way I was convinced, so to speak. Argument is a very important thing. Argument is not something to fondle about, but my arguments became stronger, and it was easier, of course, if you went into debate, to defend yourself and your opinion, and also pedagogically to show others what you understood or what you wanted to convey. But underneath all this, there was still perception. And it hadn't reached perception. I had no idea. But it is something very tricky here. If we perceive in the regular world something cannot be and be at the same time, even though that could be shown by Bohm, Penrose, quantum mechanics, gazillions of proof, the whole scientific world that is of any weight, it doesn't matter if you can't perceive it, if it's not out there in your direct perception. This is exactly what De Bono means by perception. His special take on the word perception. Very special. It's actually so far from the regular word, it's more or less a neologism. And I think maybe that's one of the things that made it so hard to understand the book. Some people give up. This perception needed something I could see or imagine to have that changed. And I got the first glimpse here with the Klein bottle. We mentioned that one before. With the Klein bottle, I started to understand that inside and outside could be the same thing. And I think by then I started to having this longing, a longing to do what these people did. Not only having to study their work and copy it, remembering it, go further and be able to do what they did. And especially tempting was to do the works of Derrida, to be able to deconstruct myself instead, just have to rely on what he already did in certain themes and certain areas, whether that be architecture, philosophy, political ideas, music, whatever it is, art. I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to go to the juicy thing of being able, as a human being, with my own will, with my own skill, to do that. And that actually came with the book Rodolphe Cachet. That is the background. This is how I explain why it was so important. Because if it weren't for that book, I still would have been limited only to know about them, being able to recite them or quote them, or making parallels at the most, but being able to do what this book promised in creativity, but here doing deconstruction as well, as in quantum mechanics, as in Tata and Tolko. That for me to be able to do that, that was needed an imagery, something I could perceive with my whole sensing being. And that came with the mirror. That is the reason the mirror became so important. And in this book, I'm not going to take it up now, it's way too late, but I'm just going to try to show my excitement to it, and maybe that can transfer to you who's listening. With this, I finally got a picture. In the beginning, I didn't even know what I was holding in my hand. It was like I found a meteorite and understood it was coming from Mars or some strange territory. And this meteorite was filled with aliens or some of that sort. I think the first time it struck me the hardest was when I was in Prague, and it was just a sunny day, and I had something in my sachet to read. Brought it out and I had a cup of coffee with me, and I was just relaxing. And there was some musicians further away, and it was actually some group of these religious people from China, whatever they're called, Fangong or something. I don't remember. This was the scenery. I was standing there, and all of a sudden I felt something weird happening to my hair or the bottom of my skull. And I finally realized my hair on my skull was standing. And it felt all over my head and felt on my ears getting red. And I suddenly realized I have here in my hand the possibility of doing it myself. Here I have the core. I started to understand with my body first, before it even struck my head. And this is very similar how it was, for instance, with Heidegger. I still remember that when he wrote on the side, crossing over, but he never really understood mentally what he did. But bodily, he did understand it. This was the first take, and I was so amazed. I met some other people, strangers to me. I went to a bar and people asked me when something fantastic happened to me. And I don't think I was even smiling, but I was like glowing from my whole face, and I think my whole body shined somewhere. Because deep inside, I really wanted this to be a possibility. I never thought it was, but it was a need for it. That was one thing. But that it would be an actual possibility to understand from myself. And when I read in Rodolphe Gasset that, for instance, when it comes to Jacques Derrida, the deconstructionist, himself is doing a specific deconstruction in each of his works. And it's just within that work that works. And the mirror's purpose is to make it possible for you yourself to do the same process as Derrida did, or for that matter Wittgenstein, or maybe Feyerabend, I'm not sure that. To be able to do it yourself in whatever text, whatever you're thinking, and also whatever you are doing. Because this is not limited to any object, subject, theme, category. It can be done all over the place, because this is something to do with perception. This is why I want to have Edward de Bono here, who understood perception. And perception breaks everything. It doesn't matter, in a way, it doesn't matter if I have all the arguments in the world, if I have all the proof in my world. If it's not part of my perception, it will linger on. Nothing can break perception. And that's the very reason why magicians are so convincing. You know yourself that it's fake. Of course, you don't really believe the magician is doing something. But because you just see it, that makes it convincing. This is even more so, because this is a perception that surrounds you, has to do something with your whole childhood, your whole society, your whole world. That is pretty convincing. And that can only be broken by a new perception, a new imagery, and a new gestalt. That is the promise of the mirror. I will try to give you this to you in the future 3-4 episodes. But this is my autobiographically take on the whole thing, my honest thing. So it's a bit more than doubt until proven. It's a bit more, it's the whole world in one go, and that is quite a different matter. I say thank you very much and have a very good night.
Thank you.